Morning, everyone. I'm calling to order the House Committee on Labor. It is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025, 9 a.m. We're in conference room 309. So we have a lot of items on the agenda today that are mostly housekeeping, right? Those titled relating to public employment cost items. For these measures, I would ask testifiers to just stand on your written testimony. You don't have to come to the podium. It'll be much quicker that way. Okay. First item on the agenda, we have HB 1026, making emergency appropriations for public employment cost items. First to testify, we have Department of Budget and Finance in support.
Good morning, Chair. I promise I will stand on my testimony on the next one.
Yes.
For this particular bill, we are in support. Again, it's an administration bill to move forward the vehicle so that we can make the appropriate emergency appropriations for temporary hazard pay payments. We do ask, though, that unfortunately we failed to include units 1 and 10 into the language of the bill. But if those units could be added in, that would be great, so that we can make sure that we can accommodate all of the bargaining units that will be afforded temporary hazard pay going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have University of Hawaii Systems in support.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair. Michael Ng, University of Hawaii, stand on our testimony support, echoing the comments of the BNF Director.
Thank you. Next, we have Hawaii Government Employees Association in support.
HGA stands on its testimony support.
Thank you. Next, UPW in support.
Chair, Vice Chair, UPW stands for written testimony support with the amendments.
Thank you. Next, we have Hawaii Health Systems Corporation in support. Not here. Okay, members, we have any other persons here to testify on this measure? Okay, members, we have an individual also in support. Members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll be moving on to HB 1027 relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
Chair, the Department will stand on its testimony.
Thank you. Next we have UHS in support.
Yes, stand in support.
Next, UPW in support.
Chair, stand on the written testimony support, and also note that our testimony is the same for HB 1036.
Thank you. Okay, any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony and support from HHSC. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1028 relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
Chair, in support.
Thank you. Next, we have UHS in support.
Yes, thank you, Chair, in support.
HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Okay, any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony from HHSC in support. Members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to the next item on the agenda. 1029, relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support. Thank you. Next, we have UHS in support.
Thanks, Chair, in support.
Next, we have HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? We have written testimony and support from HHSC. Okay, moving on to 1030, relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
In support, Chair, thank you.
UHS in support.
Thank you, in support.
HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Okay, any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, we have written testimony and support from HSSC. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1031, relating to public employment cost items. First to testify on this measure, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, HSTA in support.
HST in support.
Okay, no other testifiers, members, any questions? Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Okay, seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1032, relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
You. Next, we have HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Okay, any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1033, relating to public employment cost items. First to testify on this measure, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Thank you. Next, we have University of Hawaii Systems in support.
Thanks, Chair, in support.
And next, we have University of Hawaii Professionals Assembly in support. Thank you. Are there any persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1034, relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, UHS in support.
Yes, thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1035 relating to public employment cost items. First testify, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, UHS in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony from HHSC in support. Members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1036 relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, UHS in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, UPW in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony in support from HHSC. Any members, any questions? Seeing none, moving on to 1037 relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1038 relating to public employment cost items. First to testify, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support.
Next, we have HGA in support.
HGA is in support.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, we do have written testimony in support from HHSC and an individual. Members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1039 relating to public employment cost items. First to testify on this measure, we have BNF in support.
Thank you, Chair, in support, and thank you very much for one of the most efficient ways of getting through all of the bills.
You're very welcome. Next, HGA in support.
Thank you, Chair. HGA is in support.
Thank you. Members, any any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none. Finally, we have HB 1040 relating to Hawaii Employer Union Health Benefits Trust Fund based composite monthly contribution. First to testify on this measure, we have Derek Mizuno from the Hawaii Employer Union Health Benefits Trust Fund in support. Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1041 relating to employees' retirement systems. First to testify on this measure, we have Thomas Williams, Executive Director from the ERS in support.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I am Gail Stroll. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of ERS. And on this item, currently in the HRS, the required minimum distribution age is 70 and a half. This modification would change it to required beginning dates for conformance with the Internal Revenue Code. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll be moving on to 1042 relating to employees' retirement systems, employer reporting review. First to testify on this measure, we have Thomas Williams, Executive Director for ERS in support.
Thank you. I'm Gail Stroll, Deputy Executive Director of the ERS. And this item would allow for additional time between the review period and when employers would have to provide additional payments and reporting. So it's merely an administrative housekeeping item. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none, members, any questions? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to HB 160 relating to Hawaii Employer Union Health Benefits Trust Fund. First to testify on this measure, we have Luis Salveria, BNF, in opposition.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Luis Oliveira, Director of Finance. The department stands on its testimony respectfully opposing this particular bill, primarily because of the complexities around addressing employee as well as retiree healthcare benefits. We understand that it is a very complex issue. We also know that this is a negotiation that happens between the employer and the employee representatives when we come to making the specific contributions for employees. Be happy to answer any questions that you have, but primarily we would like to keep the current status that what we have right now, which we believe has been working between the state and the employee representatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Brenna Hashimoto, Director for DHERD, with comments. Thank you. Next, we have Randy Pereira, Executive Director for HGA, in support.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Nui Sebas here with HGA. We sent our written testimony strong support. I do want to emphasize that the current negotiation process for UTF contributions, it lacks an impasse mechanism. So really our intent here on this measure is to allow public sector unions to actually negotiate this bill. Mahalo, available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kamakana Kaimuloa, UPW, in support.
Chair, Vice Chair, members, Kamakana Kaimuloa, Government Affairs Manager of United Public Workers. You have a written testimony and will stand on our written testimony and support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none. Members, any questions? Okay, I do have questions. Let's start with HGA. So I'd like to get a better understanding of, right, the context and the scale of this issue with the EUTF contributions and the negotiations behind it. You know, how much has costs for EUTF contributions gone up, say in the past, I don't know, 5, 10 years?
Frankly, Chair, I'm not in a position to answer that question. I don't really know. Costs have gone up substantially over time for everybody because medical insurance costs are what they are. For us, the context is simple. The current mechanism that began in the year 2000 with the creation of the EUTF does not provide for any way for disputes between the employer and the exclusive representative to be resolved. It's pretty much a one-way street. Whatever the employer proposes, the union is pretty much bound to take because the law prohibits either arbitration or striking over the issue. So we've long sought for some kind of remediation process, such as arbitration, to resolve the dispute. So that's essentially the genesis of our position.
And I believe these arbitration methods include some kind of arbitration panel, as BNF testimony indicated. Is that how it works?
Yes, it's by law, there's a 3-person panel, one individual that would be selected by the employers, one by the unions, and the third via the strike method from a list. Right now, statute calls for the list to be generated by the American Arbitration Association. We're proposing to expand the pool, if you will, by including the FMCS as another source of potential arbitrators. That's separate legislation, though.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I assume there's no such, I guess, precedent, at least in Hawaii, for a bargaining unit to use this sort of arbitration mechanism, or has there been?
For the public sector, there never has been.
Okay. But for private sector, maybe, or I'm just trying to see.
In many private sector instances, the contract that may be between an employer and a union would be all-encompassing, and cover all aspects of employment, which would include what they call health and welfare in the private sector, medical and other benefits. For those of us in the public sector here, the creation of the EUTF, not to give everybody a history lesson and prove how old I am, the history essentially was there used to be the ability for the unions to offer what were competing plans. And effectively, the plan that the state offered, what they used to call the old health fund, would compete with plans that the unions would develop. And that competition was used to kind of keep costs in check because neither side could go too far or else they would lose enrollment. When the law changed, the ability to have competition was taken away. And what we have is one option, the EUTF. And despite their best efforts, frankly, there is no mechanism for our organization, say, to even attempt to bargain, hypothetically, wages versus improvements in the share that the employer pays for the medical plan. Because we don't have any means to either arbitrate or for those units that have the right to strike over that kind of dispute. Mm-hmm. And we have in the past proposed to prior administrations the consideration of improving the medical in lieu of a pay raise. Yeah. But that we have no mechanism to adjudicate that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for HGA? Okay, my next question is for BNF. So in your written testimony, you do note some concerns regarding the qualifications of these arbitration panels to effectively determine, I guess, a compromise, right? Can you elaborate on your concerns there?
So I think And I will admit that what Mr. Pereira did say is a condition that does create some complexities with the relationship on how we address the distribution, or at least the cost-sharing mechanism for employee healthcare benefits. So because, I guess, the way that we handle and the way that we distribute it is we take what is essentially the prevailing plan, and the state offers 60% of that, and the portion of which is valued. And that value of the prevailing plan becomes essentially how much gets allocated to all the other individual plans. So if you pick the 80-20 plan, we say, okay, 60% of the 80-20 plan is the employer's portion, and then it goes. So essentially what has happened is over the course of the years, when insurance premiums go up, the percentages remain the same. And in the past couple of years, what we had with the introduction of a new plan, which was the 75-25 plan, which did create significant cost savings for a lot of employees, we continue to provide the value of which up to 90% of the value of the 75-25 plan. So what we're saying is that with these arbitration panels, when they come in, they would have to basically understand a combination about, one, the state's finances, as well as how insurance plans and the distribution of it gets distributed amongst all of the different plans, and how we end up allocating the cost to each one of them, and essentially how it's distributed between the employer and the employee. Highly complex, but again, I think from the standpoint of what Mr. Pereira is saying, we do want to take a look at compensation as a whole when you look at both wage as well as benefits going forward. And that's something that I would love to continue the conversation with all of the unions, and how we would want to approach that going forward. If this is one way to start that conversation, then we're obviously willing to continue this conversation going forward, Chair.
And do you have information with regards to like cost increases over the years, right? I think for the state and for our budget, healthcare costs and providing coverage for that is probably one of the biggest line items.
It is one of the biggest, and it's a fixed cost that that we basically have to pay, that we know it. So I don't have the exact numbers, but we can get that number for you and for the committee, Chair.
Okay, appreciate it. Okay, members, any further questions on this measure? Okay, seeing none. Oh, Representative Capella.
Yes, no, Director. Can you explain a little bit more, I guess, about the arbitration panels? I recognize that it's very, very complex and complicated work that these individuals would have to work on, but would there not necessarily be someone that's already working within VNF that could be a part of that panel? Would it be something that new people have to take on to then?
The arbitration panel would essentially be separate from either the employer or the employer. I mean, we would get to pick one, I believe, based upon the provisions of this particular bill, but we're basically putting it in the hands of somebody to represent us. Then there'd be somebody to represent the employee group, as well as a third party to help kind of come up with this thing. Depending on how it is, we know we have to pay premiums like right away once the premiums get set by ETF, however long it takes for the panel to come to some decision. There are a little bit of complexities in terms of like, okay, how quickly can they come up with a decision? What information would they need, coupled with state finances? Not just the cost of the plan itself. It's like what can both the employee and the employer bear with any type of insurance premium increases going forward. It's a highly complex situation, and I believe there's ways to address it. But again, I think in looking overall in the grand context of total compensation, that's something that I think for us as the employer group, we would want to continue to have that conversation and work with the unions.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining a little bit further.
Any other further questions on this measure? Okay, seeing none, we'll be moving on to HB 848 relating to employer union health benefits trust fund contributions. First to testify on this measure, we have Luis Alveria, Director for BNF, in opposition.
Chair, once again, very similar to the situation with the previous bill. This is one where the percentages is really what we negotiate. So setting a percentage going forward is something that we think is, a negotiation between us and the employee group. So having an unspecified percentage set in statute kind of takes away that bargaining and that negotiation process.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have Ann Lopez, Attorney General, with comments.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, Michael Shambrella, Deputy Attorney General. You have our comments, and I'm available for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. Next, we have Randy Pereira, Executive Director for HGEA, with comments.
Hello, HGA stands on its comments. Mahalo.
Thank you. Next, we have Kamakana Kaimuloa, UPW, in opposition.
Chair, Vice Chair, members, again, Kamakana Kaimuloa, stand on our written testimony in opposition. Happy to answer any questions that Mr. Pereira may not be able to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Christian Fern, Executive Director from University of Hawaii Professionals Assembly, in opposition.
Morning, Sarah Beamer for UHPA. We stand on our written testimony in opposition.
Okay, thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Seeing none. Members, any questions? Okay, seeing none. We'll be moving on to HB 813 relating to employee retirement systems. First to testify on this measure, we have Thomas Williams, Executive Director for the ERS, with comments.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Gail Stroll, Deputy Executive Director of the ERS. This would move from 10 years to 5 years to be the minimum years that makes a Tier 2 member eligible for retirement benefit and make them vested. There have been challenges on the state and county level in recruitment, and this could potentially increase the head count to the state and counties, and potentially increase the level of contributions received from members and employers. There's additional information provided, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Kamakana Kaimuloa, UPW, in support.
Chair, Vice Chair, members, again, Kamakana Kaimuloa, UPW. We'll stand on our written testimony support. I would note that in my 3 years at UPW, this is only the second time we've agreed with ERS, so we urge you to pass this bill because it makes me feel uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have also Tue, President for HSTA, in support.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, Sarah Miliantalafan on behalf of Hawaii State Teachers Association. We'll stand on our written testimony. Super excited about this. Support.
Thank you. Next, we have Randy Pereira, Executive Director for HGA, also in support.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Nui Sebastian with HGA. We'll stand on written testimony and support. I do want to emphasize that this could be another tool that the state and counties can use to recruit employees. Mahalo.
Thank you. Any other persons here to testify on this measure? Okay, seeing none, members, we do have written testimony and support from the Office of Governor, as well as an individual. Members, any questions on this measure? Okay, seeing none. Well, that was faster than I thought. Okay. We will be taking a short recess for decision making. Recess. Calling to order the Committee on Labor. We're going to be decision-making on today's agenda as well as HB 755 from last week. First, HB 1026, we're going to be passing this with amendments, adding a defective date and incorporating BNF's testimony. We'll be adding bargaining units 1 and 10. Members, any comments? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 1026, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Garrett?
Aye.
Representative Capella?
Aye.
Representative Kong, excused. Representative Reyes-Oda, excused. Recommendation is adopted, Chair.
Thank you. Next, 1027, we'll be adding defective date July 1st, 3000, passing this out with amendments. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1027, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Noting the absence of Representative Kong and Representative Reyes-Oda for the rest of the vote, any votes with reservation? Any nays? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1028. We'll also be passing this with amendments, adding a defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1028, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservation? Any nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1029. We'll also be passing this with amendments, adding a defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1029, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1030. We'll also be passing this with amendments, adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1030, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1031. We'll also be passing this with amendments, adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1031, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1032. Passing this with amendments, adding defective date of July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1032, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1033. We'll pass this out with amendments, adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1033, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservations or nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1034. We'll be passing this with amendments, adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1034, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservations or any nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1035. Passing this out with amendments, adding defective date of July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1035, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservations or any nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1036. We'll pass this out with amendments, adding defective date of July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1036, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservation or any nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. HB 1037 will be passing this with amendments, adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1037, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservations or any nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1038. We'll be passing this with amendments, adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1038, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1039. We'll also be passing this with amendments adding defective date to July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1039. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair, recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, we have 1040. We'll also be passing this with amendments adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1040. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservations or nay votes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, we have HB 1041. We'll also be passing this with amendments adding defective date July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1041. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 1042. We'll be passing this out with amendments based off of HMS. So we'll be making small technical amendments to page 1, lines 12 to 14 to read, to delete to read on the first day of the fiscal year, deleting following. That is 1 year after the end of fiscal year in which the failure to furnish the required information occurred. And we'll also be adding a defective date, July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 1042. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Moving on to HB 160. For this measure, I think we heard and see from the written and oral testimony, the concerns regarding the increasing costs to the employees, not to mention the state. Being subject to this contribution rate myself, it is a bit concerning that every other public employee has to be subject to this as well. But I think there are underlying drivers here that are kind of out of our control as well, like the increasing cost of healthcare. That's just standard across the board. But that being said, the system hasn't really changed substantially for the last 20-something years. So I think it does merit some reevaluation and potential change. That being said, we're not prepared at this moment to make these commitments, and so we encourage further conversation during the interim between myself, the employer, as well as bargaining units who would like to be at the table. So, I would like to make that commitment to this committee and the public. So with that being said, I'll be deferring this measure on HB 160. Next, we'll be moving to HB 848. Again, right, it's trying to address the same issue, but in a different way. And again, I think this just highlights the continued struggles for a lot of the employees. So with the same rationale as the previous measure, I'll be deferring this measure. Finally, we have HB 813. We'll be passing this with amendments adding a defective date of July 1st, 3000. Members, any comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 813. Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Members, are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Chair recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. And we'll be moving on to the final decision making. This is HB 755 from last week's. This is relating to paid family leave. There are a number of amendments I'd like to make based off of the testimony, particularly in response to a lot of DLIR's concerns, and respectively so, this is a huge program that they'd be required to administer. So we'd like to try to clarify and address as many of their concerns as possible. So members, if you could please bear with me here and appreciate the patience. First Amendment. To address concerns regarding application year in DLIR's testimony, we will be replacing the definition of application year on page 1's line 12 with a definition of benefit year that mirrors current TDI laws in HRS 392-3. We will take language offered by HCAN's written testimony on page 4, and we'll be replacing all references to application year with benefit year in the bill. Second, to address DLI's concern regarding administrative burden on the state and employers regarding hours tracking, we will be amending page 2, line 1, by deleting the phrase for 20 or more hours. Okay, next one, to conform with minimum earning requirements to the minimum wage in 2028, we will amend page 2, line 2 to replace $400 with $5,040, right? I think this, in testimony, we saw some calculation that the minimum wage currently is $14, but in 2028, it'll be $18. So we're just going to make that change. Okay, next one. To eliminate ambiguity between the term claim and application, we replace the term application with claim. We'll also replace application year with benefits year. Next, to clarify the term designated person, we'll add a new definition to page 2 after line 11 to read, designated person means any individual related by blood or whose association with the covered individual is the equivalent of a family relationship. A covered individual may choose one designated person per benefit year, and the designated person may be identified by the covered individual at the time the covered individual requests a leave or files a claim. Related, we will also add this term to be included into the definition of family member on page 4, line 17. To address DLI's concern regarding the persons covered, we amend pages 4, line 17 by adding or the spouse or domestic partner of a covered individual's sibling. Next, to address concerns regarding the ambiguity of wages for self-employed individuals, we will adopt HCAN's suggestion on page 4 and 5 on the written testimony to add the definition for wages after page 8, line 2. Next, to address concerns regarding first payment for benefits within 2 weeks, we will amend page 9, line 17 to 20 to read, subsection C, the first payment of benefits shall be made to covered individuals with 2 weeks after the family and medical leave claim is filed or the family and medical leave begins, whichever is later. And subsequent payments shall be made every 2 weeks thereafter. The department shall notify the claimants of any additional information required to complete or cure their claim within 5 business days of filing a claim. Next, to address concerns regarding the lack of deadline for medical leave benefits, we will adopt HCAN's suggestion on page 4 of their written testimony to amend page 10, lines 1, 2, 3, and yes, adopt that from the written testimony. Next, to provide clarity to address the requirement that workers accumulate a minimum number of hours of leave prior to benefits becoming payable to ease administration of the program, we will amend page 11's line 1 to 3 to read subsection C, family and medical leave insurance benefits shall not be payable to the covered individual until the individual accumulates at least 8 hours of family and medical leave insurance benefits. Next, we'll be amending page 12, lines 11 through 12 by deleting in which all of the leave authorized under this chapter is not taken sequentially. Next, to satisfy any concerns of possible conflict with the Employee Retirement Income Security Act and the Prepaid Healthcare Act, we will add language from page 13, lines 17 to page 14, line 7 to read, subsection B, during any medical leave taken pursuant to section -2, the employer shall maintain health care benefits the covered individual had prior to taking such leave to the extent provided under section 393-15. Nothing in the subsection shall be interpreted to modify chapter 393. Subsection C, during any family leave taken pursuant to section -2, the employer shall maintain any health care benefits the covered individual had prior to taking such leave for the duration of the leave as if the covered individual had continued in employment continuously from the date the covered individual commenced the leave until the date the family leave insurance benefits terminate, provided that the covered individual shall continue to pay the covered individual's share of the cost of health benefits as required prior to the commencement of the leave. Subsection D, nothing in this subsection shall be interpreted to conflict with Chapter 393 or 29 U.S.C. Section 1144, subsection B, Section 5, subsection A. Subsection E, this section shall be enforced as provided in Chapter 398. Next, to clarify and address potential issues of double dipping into both family leave benefits and accrued paid leave, we will add a new subsection E to page 16, line 16 to read subsection E. Under no circumstance shall an employee be required to use, exhaust, or substitute any accrued vacation leave, sick leave, or other paid time off to or while receiving family and medical leave insurance benefits under this chapter. However, an employee may elect to substitute or use any accrued vacation leave, sick leave, or other paid time off while receiving family or medical leave insurance benefits under this chapter or paid paid leave pursuant to Sections 398-4. If the accrued vacation leave, sick leave, or other paid time off is compensated at the rate of an employee's usual pay, the employer shall not simultaneously receive family and medical leave insurance benefits under this chapter. If that accrued vacation leave, sick leave, or other paid time off is compensated at less than the employee's usual pay, the employee shall be eligible to simultaneously receive family and medical leave insurance benefits, provided that the aggregate amount the employee would receive does not exceed the employee's average weekly wage used by the department to calculate family and medical leave insurance benefits. Nothing in this subsection requires an employee to receive or use additional vacation leave, sick leave, or paid time off as described in this section. Related to this, we will be deleting language from page 30, lines 19 to 13. Next, we have to adopt the HCAN amendments on the written testimony of page 5, amending sections 15, starting on page 22, line 5, and we could reference the written testimony there. Next, to ensure DLIR can administer funds to establish an IT data system for this program, we amend page 23, line 17 to page 24, line 3 to read, subsection C, on January 1st, 2027, or as soon as possible thereafter, the Director of Finance shall transfer blank dollars from the general fund to the Family and Medical Trust Fund to cover the cost of startup to administer this chapter before and during the first year of payroll contributions. Such costs may include, but not limited to, the hiring and employing of personnel to perform functions related to the establishment and administration of the Family and Medical Leave Trust Fund, project administration and outreach, and the procurement of information technology and data system to develop and implement the administrative infrastructure to implement this chapter. All contracts shall be done in accordance with state law with regarding procurement of services from an outside vendor. Next, we'll be adding a defective date of July 1st, 3000. We'll also be making any technical amendments for clarity, consistency, and style. We'll also be noting in the committee report the necessity of DLR to have 120 estimated positions to effectively administer this program. Okay, I know that was a lot, so members, any comments on this measure? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on House Bill 755, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Are there any votes with reservation or nay votes? Thank you. The recommendation is adopted, Chair.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. This hearing is adjourned.